the agency I was at didn't have a very sophisticated measurement offering. And so they hired an incrementality firm to come in and run these tests. And we saw the stark differences of the actual results from the experiments compared to what the performance marketing platforms were claiming credit for. And so that really kind of crystallized for me that there is a methodology to prove this in a more scientific manner. And that sort of was my fall into the rabbit hole of marketing mix modeling and incrementality experimentation. So
hey everyone, welcome to the Full Funnel Podcast. I'm Rohit, your host and your guide through this ever-evolving world of AI-first marketing. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Ben Dutter, the Chief Strategy Officer of Power Digital and the founder of FusePoint. That's the entity under Power Digital, I believe. Hey Ben, awesome to have you here. I'm a big fan of your content, and definitely one of the best and most respected voices in modern measurement in the industry today, I must say. Please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the background, as well as then tell us a bit about FusePoint and what is it that you do there.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, and likewise, Rohit, excited to be here and talk about measurement and AI-based marketing. I think it's a really pressing topic today. A lot of our clients are really focused on this right now, so I think it's good and timely conversation for sure. So I've been in sales and marketing for about 19 years. I put myself through college working sales floor and learning some soft skills, which eventually translated to having a great opportunity with a marketing shop.
Yeah.
And I've kind of bounced throughout the industry, eventually landed agency side, which I fell in love with. And I've now been at Power Digital for about 4 years. I was originally hired to kind of help build out their strategy and their, kind of professionalized client services division.
Mm-hmm.
And that eventually led to me becoming the chief strategy officer as we've been on a great kind of meteoric growth here. And then as of this year, officially in January of 2025, we launched FusePoint, like you mentioned, which is we say it's a peninsula and not an island. It's a subsidiary brand within Power Digital that's still connected operationally, but it's focused on data and strategy consulting for brands that do or don't work with Power Digital. So we wanted to basically take the knowledge that we've accumulated at Power Digital and democratize that and make it applicable to companies that work with an in-house team or another agency of their choice.
Amazing. I think, just looking at what you guys do and some of the team members that share some of the content, I think probably definitely one of the more advanced agencies out there.
I like to think so.
Going above and beyond what is normally done by agencies, right? Amazing stuff. So let's get into it with regards to measurement. Let's rewind to a moment where you realized that essentially the conventional attribution dashboards were just not cutting it anymore, right? What was that particular problem that was your clients were asking for that kind of push you to drive that change and push it forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I was lucky enough that I started brand side rather than agency side. And so I think when you start brand side, you start based off of, the single source of truth is the P&L. My old CMO, Mark Cadre, used to say that all the time. It's like, if you are not seeing the revenue and the EBITDA go up, then something's not working, right? And so being based on that, kind of learning my initial skills from that lens was really helpful for me. Attribution was a way to get more granular. And what we saw very quickly, I managed our paid search, our email, and our very early days, this was really pre-paid social, programmatic display, and some early paid social. And what we saw is that when attribution in those platforms looked really good, it didn't necessarily correspond to total business performance. So little baby marketer Ben knew from a pretty young age, early on in the digital attribution landscape, that it wasn't always what it cracked up to be and that it wasn't particularly accurate. I think where I really became more of a vocal and ardent proponent of incrementality testing in particular and incrementality measurement. It was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. I was working with a number of large brands, and they actually hired, at the agency I was at didn't have a very sophisticated measurement offering. And so they hired a third party incrementality firm to come in and run these tests. And we saw the stark differences of the actual results from the
Yeah.
experiments compared to what, the performance marketing platforms were claiming credit for. And so that really kind of crystallized for me that there is a methodology to prove this in a more scientific manner. And that sort of was my fall into the rabbit hole of marketing mix modeling and incrementality experimentation. So that was about, like I said, 7 or 8 years ago. And now it's been a really strong passion of mine in that time.
Nice. Yeah, I think now it's all the rage and everyone's like on board with the program. So less education required, thanks to folks like yourself. So let's dive a little bit more into into incrementality testing again, right? Specifically, I think you launched like an agency-wide testing, cadence, or essentially rewiring how every channel manager or owner kind of thought about success, right? Can you walk me through those early age? What were the kind of hypotheses did you run, and what did the early dashboards look like, and how did it advance to today?
Yeah, absolutely. The mantra that we live by now at Power is contribution, not attribution. We
Okay.
want to make sure that we're contributing to our clients' growth, and we want to make sure that our activities are driving real ROI. And that core philosophy and principle was true even before the kind of professionalization of our incrementality process. When I first joined Power Digital about 4 years ago, they had just started going down the kind of journey towards marketing mix modeling. There was a couple of very smart analytics people and data science people who had heard of this and knew about it. But at the time, it was about 400 employees, and the
Right.
vast majority of them were tactical subject matter experts in their given channel. Think of paid search experts, paid social
Yeah.
experts, you name it. Power Digital did it at that time. And everybody was focused on making their channel as performant as possible. And obviously, attribution is the easiest way to do that within Google
Yeah.
Analytics or within the platforms themselves. And that's most of our clients were also satisfied with that. But I think at the time, it was good timing. That was early days, right around iOS 14 as well. And it just started, it was kind of peak COVID. And so there was a lot of opportunity where clients were looking for an alternative explanation. And I think it was really that right cultural moment, that sort of 2021 peak COVID bubble time where attribution post iOS 14 was being viewed a little bit skeptically by client teams. That allowed me to come in and because of my experience, I sort of gave the vocabulary to the team and they were able to immediately jump into it because the core philosophy at Power was so dedicated to, well, we want to make clients money. We want to grow our clients. It was a natural way for them to develop a new skill set. And so we had an immediate surge of internal and external interest. And hey, we have now the capability to run marketing mix models. We have the capability to do kind of preliminary rudimentary incrementality tests. And those early tests were very instrumental in proving out the value or the lack of value from some of those initiatives.
Right.
And what we found is more and more clients saw the benefit of that. It created an internal incentive for all teams to sort of orient around that and get cultural alignment. So those first 30 days, I'd say was a lot of it was me convincing people that this is important. And trust me, let's test it. But once those first tests came back, those first 60, 90-day tests came back, it was really just a domino effect. Everybody has wanted to do this. And since then, now we've done about 1,200 incrementality experiments as an organization. And that's accelerating significantly. We're doing more than 50 a month now at this current rate for across our client set. And most of our clients come to us explicitly knowing that that is the Power Digital way that we are going to validate and measure our ROI.
Right. So upfront, you're kind of setting that expectation and showing that this is the cultural shift that needs to happen, right?
100%. Yeah, I joke that my main job is actually change management at the board level for my clients. It's a lot of it is just explanation and education of, CFOs or people who maybe are very far removed from this in the day to day, but that are signing the checks and making the big decisions. And so a lot of my time is spent actually representing clients to their powers that be to do the right
100%.
thing and when it comes to budgets. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. So once they start, like once they accept this change that needs to happen, and they start the initial movement towards incrementality testing, what are some of the data points? Maybe you can give them some strategies in terms of like what do you use to track these shifts to ensure that everyone's on the right path while the testing is going?
Yeah, I think in general, it depends on the client's risk aversion and thirst for knowledge. Usually, the more urgent and faster we need to get to an answer, the riskier it will be, and potentially the sloppier the data will be. But we need to, we move at the speed of business, we say. So sometimes there's a very urgent, critical business problem that has to get solved. We're willing to forego a little bit of scientific rigor for that. Most of our clients, though, are in a pretty stable pattern. Our average client makes about $50 million in revenue per year, just for context for those listening, in terms of size of who I'm usually speaking to.
Yeah.
And so most of those clients are big enough and stable enough where one bad month is not going to tank the business. They have a decent cash flow. And so it generally comes down to how much of the business are you willing to disrupt in order to do a test, and how important is the information. So a lot of the work that we do is in identifying the priority tests first. And I always say it's the thing that we're, number one, the most invested in and the most skeptical of. So if there's something that is a very high percentage of a variable budget, such as an ad budget, that we think historically at other clients or because of a modeling exercise doesn't seem to produce a lot of incrementality, that's where we want to start. It's much easier to get CFOs on board and people who sign the checks on board if you're cutting spend as opposed to asking for additional spend.
Yeah.
And so we always look to try to identify and optimize for waste first in as minimally disruptive of a means as possible. And usually what we'll see is something like, we'll do a 5 to 10% reduction in ad spend across their total budget, but concentrated in an isolated area. And we see minimal or no loss in performance in that. And that gives us confidence of our hypothesis that it's overspent. And once that comes back, then the kind of blended metrics that we would want to look at are improvements to things like customer acquisition cost or marketing efficiency ratio. Some people call that like blended ROAS or MER, ACOS, et cetera. But whatever the kind of overall contribution margin is post ad dollars, is that getting better as we reallocate and redistribute budget based on the findings of these tests?
Awesome. Yeah, that's like a clear path and like a kind of like a roadmap towards getting to the end point, right? Yeah.
Definitely.
I think everyone who's initially getting into it is always worried about, like you said, the cost of actually doing the test. But yeah, I think once they figure out that it works and they see that results, I think it's pretty convincing, right? Awesome. Let's switch it up a little bit about how your agency is actually building some products, right? Like I believe you have something called the Nova platform. I saw that it can answer some pretty advanced like optimization questions. For all the data nerds who are listening, can you explain to us how that works?
Yeah, so Nova is a internal operating system that we've been building for about 8 years now. So it long predates my involvement with the company. Right now, just to back up a step, the original impetus of Nova was really to build internal operational efficiency. So it was a tool for us, really for a lot of like internal administrative things, like time tracking and client billing and making new contracts. And so the team was really focused on what are ways that we can develop Nova applications and modules that help us do our job more quickly. And early days of that were, I remember 4 or 5 years ago, we started to explore large language models and applying some of the efficiency gains that we had done internally to more business application and performance marketing application type initiatives. And the first major suite of applications that we rolled out for that is called Nova Intelligence. And Nova Intelligence looks at a number of different things. One, it has a marketing mix modeling module within it, which we talked a little bit about just now, but happy to dig in more there. So it's making recommendations and budget optimizations based on what it's seeing in the model of what is the most accretive to the business from an incrementality perspective. Number two is it has a customer analytics module. So customer insights and customer cohorts are kind of two halves of the same coin. So it's identifying elements of customer cohorts based on their lifetime value. It's identifying demographic information. We've layered in third-party data appendations for that as well. So we can match our clients' customer profile data to psychographic information and credit card information. So we can say their average income and what they're interested in, what brand car they own, and all these other things that become helpful. And finally, there's a creative analysis tool within it as well that ties back engagement metrics, all the classic things you think of, click-through rate, view rate, but also tying back customer economics to those ad exposures. So we've actually worked in partnership with Meta, TikTok, and now Google to create a first-party data clean room environment for them, so that we are matching our customer first-party data with their user first-party data, and essentially connecting, Ben saw this ad and then Ben made this purchase of this product, and then he made this second purchase of this other product 6 months later, and his LTV is X. And so being able to tie that to a customer journey around creative is really helpful. And so to answer your question, that's the bones of what that works like, are the modules. The AI layer on top of that is we have Insights AI from within Nova. So our team can actually query Nova in a human language format and ask it questions like, what was the highest LTV ad that we ran in a summer sale of 2023? And it will come back and synthesize that information. And so it's reducing the time to value in terms of what an account team, client team can answer very specific, very deep in the weeds, granular questions without having to run a SQL query. For the data engineers, it's all built on Snowflake, Fivetran, DBT, and we use a number of different LLMs depending upon the use case, including Chat, Gemini, and Anthropic.
Awesome. That's super impressive. Yeah, we're kind of dabbling in the same space as well when it comes to, creating some AI data analysts or marketing analysts kind of space. We'll talk a little bit about that shortly. That's really interesting. I was at ETL recently. Unfortunately, we couldn't meet up. I couldn't make it to a session at all because I was busy at the booth. But I saw you had this talk on like retail media measurement or something like that. And you warned that essentially, retail media spend, a lot of it is essentially being wasted, right? Because you're essentially buying customers that would have come anyway. How do you sniff that out early, right? Could you perhaps share some of these measurement strategies when it comes to retail media?
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that are less familiar, most retail media, at least when I'm referring to it, I'm more so referring to kind of the search or product centric retail media on RMNs that are focused from the actual retailer. So think of the Roundells, Walmart Connect, etc. And so a lot of those platforms, the retailer actually requires the brand, if they want distribution, whether that's online or in store, to have a certain amount of their budget put towards the RMN to kind of pad their margin and pad their numbers of like, look at how many advertisers are spending on our platform. But what we found with some testing and modeling is that it has no discernible lift in many cases, not all the time, but in many cases, there's no discernible lift in sales in store or online with retail media. Now, that being said, there's the more rich media offerings within larger RMN DSPs. Like I think the Amazon DSP is actually a great exception to this rule in the sense that they have a lot of inventory that is not strictly search based, whether that's on Amazon or within the Amazon ecosystem, such as Whole Foods. But there is a lot of great inventory there that we have tested that you can do things like geographic based targeting. And so you can see geo based lift tests. But in many cases, the search based, if I type in top avocado at Whole Foods or whatever, or like best avocado, like that search result may not affect myself psychologically to pick that brand versus another. And we've done that testing a number of times within Amazon search as well as with a number of these other RMNs too.
Interesting. I guess with all media channels, there's some tactics that are more incremental, some less incremental, I guess, right? Yeah.
Generally, yes. I would say the earlier in the consumer journey or the higher in the funnel, if that's the phrase you want to use, or closer in the mental availability model, the channel is. Typically, we find that to be more incremental than channels that are closer to the point of purchase. And it makes sense because the time and the impact that you can have on somebody earlier in their cycle influences them more and more towards your brand, as opposed to if they're very close to the point of purchase and they're deciding between brand A and brand B, they're likely to pick the brand that they're the most familiar with. And so if that moment is the first time they're seeing your ad, your brand B, and brand A has been advertising to them all along, they're more likely to pick brand A. So as a good heuristic, generally the higher the likelihood for the ad to have a high click-through rate and a high
Right.
attributed ROAS, typically the less incremental it is.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, makes total sense. I think some of the CPG brands could definitely get some insight from all of this, emerging brands especially, right? On that note, I think one of the biggest topics when it comes to, some of these brands is how to measure essentially the halo effects, right? D2C to Amazon and so on and so forth. In real life, how do you surface some of these spillovers quick enough so that you can act on it, right? Could you share maybe some preferred strategies or methods to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. What we typically find is that most media has an impact on all revenue distribution channels.
Mhm.
So there's a kind of a classic mistake that I think a lot of brands make where they treat marketing channels sort of as silos. They have a
Yeah.
specific marketing campaign for D2C that's designed to drive sales to D2C. They have a specific marketing campaign for Amazon that drives to Amazon. They have one that drives to in-store, brick and mortar sales, et cetera. And they view them all as all sort of disparate. There
Yeah.
might be like a larger brand campaign or something that they think covers on all of them.
Yeah.
But what we found is that all channels actually both synergize and cannibalize with each other. And
100%.
so if you're running a D2C centric meta ad, it's very likely that you will see a similar incremental return on ad spend or an iROAS
Yeah.
equivalently across all revenue streams that you're on. So if you're getting a $1 iROAS in brand.com, you're
Mhm.
also probably getting around a dollar iROAS on Amazon.com. And you're also
Yeah.
probably getting another dollar iROAS in store as well. And so this adheres to the physical availability model. I mentioned
Yeah.
the mental availability model earlier, but distribution is a key part of what makes marketing more effective. So the more channels that your product is distributed, the likelier that you're getting higher ROI from your
Yeah.
marketing. So the way that we measure that again comes back to incrementality experimentation is the
Yeah.
easiest way to do it. If you have in-store location data, such as you're getting the physical turnover or sell-through data from the store, like I'm in San Diego, California, there's
Yeah.
a Whole Foods in Hillcrest where I live, just down the street. If I have a brand that's sold at Whole Foods, I
Yeah.
can do a very targeted marketing campaign just around that Whole Foods and
Yeah.
see, does that spike compared to a control market where I am not selling, or the inverse. If I'm suspicious of a channel and I want to measure its efficacy, I can
Yeah.
turn that channel off only in San Diego and see,
Yeah.
okay, what does the San Diego Whole Foods do in
Yeah.
comparison to a control group, the San Francisco Whole Foods maybe. And so at that point, you can feel very confident. Yeah, this was a meta ad that had a click through rate that was designed to drive to bensbread.com or whatever, but it actually drove a great return in Whole Foods in
Yeah.
store as well. And so that's the most rigorous way to do it.
Yeah.
I think that it's challenging to get that level of data for a lot of brands. They don't have the
Yeah.
in-store data. And
Yeah.
so it's more of a pulse strategy of where
Yeah.
you are taking a concentrated flight of your budget over a more
Mhm.
short period of time and concentrate it and see, does that cause an elastic effect in sell through and demand in retail. And then you can
Right.
use some modeling, such as a causal impact analysis,
Mhm.
or using causal inference modeling to
Yeah.
detect, deviance from the projected or predicted mean. And that will give you some confidence that yes, this spike in spend is causing a spike in sell through. We call that the Super
Right.
Bowl effect. But yeah, is there a big lift in store or whatever from this big lift in spend? But it's riskier and harder to execute scientifically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's amazing insight. Yeah, I think let's switch it up a little bit on circling back to the finance side of things and the P&L. Marketers are always struggling to kind of justify these budgets that they need to do all of these things, right? How do you tackle these tough conversations with the CEOs or the CFOs, when you get into these client meetings? What are the recommendations you can give to our audience who might be marketing leaders or CMOs on how to tackle that conversations, especially when it comes to, some of these more modern measurement strategies that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it depends on the state of the business. Again, I believe
Mhm.
a framework is really important, and
Yeah,
the business P&L kind of beats everything else in that hierarchy. And
100%.
so if the business, so I'll often we'll sit down with a CFO or a CMO, and
Hmm.
one of the first things we do is actually go through the P&L with them, and we'll try to
Right.
understand. what's your contribution margin, what's your EBITDA, what are your variable and fixed costs, and then we can ideally translate that to a lifetime value to customer acquisition cost model, where the lifetime value is actually fully loaded margin, so inclusive of operating expenses, inclusive of COGS, inclusive of returns. And once we have that data, you can't really refute that data. That's just based off of actuals and math in an accounting spreadsheet, right?
That's it. Yeah.
You can understand where they're at. If their LTV to CAC is significantly higher than what we see as typical benchmark, which is usually with all profits loaded in, usually our benchmark is a 1.5 to 1 ratio. So if it costs you $100 to acquire a customer, you want that customer to be contributing about $150 of EBITDA margin in order for that to be like a consistent, profitable engine for you. If it's, let's say that business I sit down with has a 4 to 1 EBITDA margin on their LTV to CAC, that tells me that they're probably under invested and their marketing is significantly more effective or incremental than they know. And maybe they're being held to some other kind of efficiency metric, such as a daily MER, blended ROAS, or such as a certain amount. Like a lot of brands operate off of a percentage of revenue model. So whatever the revenue is for that month, you can't exceed 10% of that revenue amount in budget because for whatever reason, that's what they are comfortable with from a margin perspective. So showing them a little bit of a different way to read the P&L and look at it from a customer economic standpoint, comparing that to benchmarks is often very helpful for us to understand, are they over or under invested? The inverse is more often true, where they're actually over invested. Much of my job has been recommending to clients and brands to reduce the amount of ad spend that they do, that they deploy, or at least reallocate to more incremental channels, because maybe I've had clients as high as 50% of their revenue being allocated to advertising dollars. And usually what we see is, because of diminishing returns, a lot of that higher spend threshold, the marginal ROAS on that is so poor, as they would have been much better off just not spending that money in the first place. So the step one is review the P&L. Step two is run a preliminary light marketing mix model that looks at marginal ROAS curves. Do we understand kind of where that point of diminishing returns is, or at least hypothetical diminishing returns based on the model? Show them those two numbers and say, hey, you're spending at $40 million a year. You actually should be spending at $20 million a year. That pops open some eyeballs. Usually people are pretty surprised when they hear that, right?
For them.
And so then it becomes well, let's validate this, right? Because we never want to make business decisions off of math. We want to make business decisions off of science and off of an experiment. And so let's run that experiment. And if that experiment holds true, then we feel a lot more confident in making adjustments. And at that point, I've built a lot of trust and credibility with that C-suite.
Amazing. Yeah, sounds like a very sound framework that everyone should be kind of using. Talking about the organization itself, I believe this whole relationship between marketing and finance is a huge thing that everyone needs to kind of understand, that they're on the same team, right? And they have to essentially work collectively towards these goals. And I always see there's a lot of boardroom drama when it comes to fighting for budgets, and different marketing teams fighting for budgets as well. I would like to hear your thoughts or your take on, the modern data-driven marketing team structure, right? What does an ideal team look like to you these days?
Yeah, I think that the chief growth officer role or the chief revenue officer role is really interesting and emerging more. I've also seen more clients, and actually Power Digital is structured this way, have a chief commercial officer or a chief business officer, where we have one person who kind of sits in between revenue generation and finance. So it's more around the overall commercials of the business. I've seen the CGO, the CRO hold a similar role depending on the brand. So I actually view them as part of the same, because the marketing's job is to build sustainable long-term lifetime value with customers. In my opinion, that's the number one job. You have to acquire 100%. Customers and you have to keep customers, which is the function and the lever that you have to make money. I mean, that's the only two ways to make money. You get customers or you keep customers, right? And so that's pretty much it. And so I think that they really should be on the same team. And I've seen more unification around a CGO or CRO type role who has a finance background or a marketing background, and they kind of live in that dual seat. For more traditional organizations that have both a CFO and a CMO, it really is just about that collaboration and education, right? The reason why often the CMOs are the ones asking for more budget is because they have some kind of belief that they could do more. They could grow top line faster. They could generate a higher return. And the CFOs often, maybe take a more cynical view that it's more of a cost center, right? And that they maybe have seen in times where they've been more strict with budget, they still are seeing growth from the business. And the fact is, they're both right.
Yeah.
And so finding a way to translate that in a common lexicon or a common calculation that both agree to gives them a lot more synergy and a lot more ability to actually make those decisions. And again, it generally comes back to the point of diminishing returns. Where is that threshold where marketing becomes more of a cost center and less of an ROI engine?
Right.
And so getting the data and getting the financial team with the marketing team and all speaking that same language, reviewing that same report or dashboard or whatever in the same light, I think really obviates a lot of those challenges. So I think as long as we're having marketing teams who are held to an accountable ROI using modern measurement. Similarly, we have finance teams that are educated on what those methods mean and how that ROI translates to long-term sales and short-term sales. At the end of the day, it's about that education, and then that builds alignment.
Interesting. Yeah, makes total sense. I think the C-suite has to kind of rethink how they're going to restructure this modern teams, right? Especially with regards to changes that are happening in the AI world and so on and so forth. Just on that note, that's great advice. Thanks for that. Let's take a little bit of a walk into the future, like peering out 2 years from now. Where do you see this entire industry going, specifically marketing and measurements? Like, do you see like some kind of automated decision agents or things that are essentially going to either be automated or have human in the loops? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's already happening today. Something like 50% of media purchased in the US is algorithmic media, which you could argue is all machine learning, AI driven media anyway. If you've ever talked to a performance marketer, you hear them talk about quote unquote the algo every day. They're like, I have to adhere to the algo. I have to, right. And so we're already there in a lot of those cases. I think it's more of the broader decisioning around how much to spend, what channels to spend in, who my audience is, deep AI personalization, things like that. I think that there's always an asymmetrical frontier. And what I mean by that is that if you imagine marketing sophistication or any kind of sophistication across a bell curve, we're in the very, very far right end of the bell curve where there are a handful of very small, sophisticated businesses that are going all in on agentic commerce, all in on AI-driven decisioning and measurement. And on the bulk of the businesses that are working through that are actually in the middle of the bell curve are actually, probably 5 or 10 years away from that. I think the one exception to that is going to be with the rise of shopper bots. And we saw that release recently with ChatGPT. You can now buy and shop through ChatGPT. Perplexity is announcing that they're doing a shopper commerce system within within their platform. And so I think if the cultural consumer uses change significantly, quickly, that is always the thing, the impetus that forces brands to adapt. Brands don't adapt unless the customer adapts first. And so the customers, if we see and we're already seeing it Power Digital, a huge upsurge in AI-based traffic to brands and AI-based conversions coming to brands, then the brands are being forced to react to that. I think long term, probably not in 2 years, but maybe in 5 to 7 years, we will see more marketing agent wranglers where a growth pod today of an in-house team or a marketing team at an agency might be 7 to 9 people where you have different fields of expertise. You have somebody who's on life cycle and someone who's on paid social and someone who's in community management or brand and whatever. I think eventually you'll probably get to a point where there's more of a generalist who kind of understands conceptually how those things work, but they're not hand shooting the photos, and they're not hand writing the social messages, and they're not hand writing ad copy. They're just kind of they're the brain of a little squad of AI agents who are doing a lot of that work and reacting. So I think that that's going to be very common, where you get these like one-man growth pods, where today it's probably 7 to 9 people. And, I think that where humans are always going to be the most valuable, in my opinion, is in matters of subjectivity and matters of taste and matters of creativity. AI cannot it's not sentient. It's not able to create anything net new. And I think that we're very far away off. We can go philosophical down the AGI route if you want, Rohit, but I think we're still a long ways off from that. And so I think that's where humans will still always be in the driver's seat, innovating on the creativity side, innovating on the subjectivity and matters of taste side. But if there's an objectively correct answer or an objectively clear process to go through, I don't think that that's going to be the domain of humans for very much longer in the future.
Awesome. I think we can wrap it up for this edition. Thank you so much, Ben. Huge thanks for sharing your measurement wisdom and your deep insights into in the marketing industry. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Rohit. It was very fun to chat through this, and time flew by. So enjoyed it a lot.
Awesome. It's great meeting you finally face to face as well. And so, to everyone listening, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. If you found any value in this conversation, please do follow Ben and subscribe to his channel so you don't miss another episode. Pass it along to your teammates who might, find some of these incrementality strategies useful. So we'll be back next week with another guest and episode. Until then, keep testing, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.